Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'm sorry I missed yesterday, but I have to say from what I heard this morning and this afternoon, the suggestion earlier that we should all go off to the pub with Philip, I kind of wanted to go right then and there. Because it seems like the discussion has in many ways been rather depressing, that we're not in a good place, that a conference about financing the SDGs is a conference about financing a mess. They're sort of too much and yet not enough, if you will. Jonathan mentioned the problem with the MDGs was people kind of took it as, oh, look, here's development, and a country could be doing well on development but terrible on human rights, and everybody would say they were a development success. Is that really right? If we had that problem with the MDGs, we're going to have it in spades with the SDGs, which don't cover everything, including, as Magdalena mentioned, implied, there's not a growth goal in the SDGs. So this seems to be a real problem. Going back to the MDGs, all the costing studies of the MDGs were quite careful to say, this is how much it would have cost. This is how much we would have spent were we to have met the MDGs. It's very clear from the last panel why you really need language like that this time around as well, in that money is part of it. Financing does matter. Money does matter, but so much else matters too. And again, if that was true last time, it's going to be even more true today, and especially if by money what you mean is aid. The trillions of dollars that it's estimated for the SDGs to cost. It shows how little it is to do with us and following the Crow's rule. By us, I mean donor countries. So, that leaves you with the question, we kind of knew what the MDGs were about. They were kind of about giving direction to aid flows. What the heck are the SDGs for? Well, they're a consensus view of a whole load of stuff that probably matters with no legally binding authority, hopefully useful somewhere around the margin at making the odd politician feel slightly guilty before they do something evil. Maybe. But if that's what they're for, then the idea that you could have a costing study followed by a financing session doesn't really make too much sense. So again, does money matter? Yes, but does the kind of money that can realistically be raised or repurposed or realigned at a square brackets aid, close square brackets financing conference matter? And the obvious answer is only very much at the margin, perhaps only at the margin of the margin. Does that mean we should give up on Addis? Well, one, I don't think we can, partially because of a spillover effect. That if Addis is declared a failure, that's going to set up the meetings around the SDGs in a really bad way. And I think it might even have an impact on Paris too. Addis sort of needs to be a success so that the world can say, hey, look, international conferences can do stuff that's useful. Because even if you think that an SDG financing conference probably ain't going to amount to a hill of beans, other international conferences really matter. And so we need this one to be a success to sort of build the momentum. But also, I don't think we should, because it is actually going to be a moment to get people around a table, possibly to commit to stuff. Even if the funding the SDGs framework is perhaps a little bit of a silly one, we can discuss better aid, better targeting of aid, as it might be. We can discuss, do we want a target for more aid to poor people or poor countries? Particularly poor people and particularly poor countries, pardon me. And beyond aid, we can talk about non-aid official financial flows. We can talk about measuring non-aid official financing flows and maybe even setting a target for non-aid official financial flows. How do we use things like loans and guarantees to deliver on development? Frankly, especially given all of the failures of the past, the long record of non-success with PPPs has been something that's come up repeatedly, and I think quite correctly. If we know we're not going to get a lot more aid money, how do we actually use non-aid money in a way more effectively than we have in the past? And how do we get more of it? And I think we can get more of that. Unlike the aid discussion, I think there is space for a discussion of more non-aid financial flows. So just to take two examples involving the World Bank, the World Bank traditionally has had a rather conservative idea of how much it should lend compared to its equity. If it became a little less conservative about that, it could lend a lot more without any government having to give it more money. MEGA, the World Bank's guarantee arm, is institutionally a separate body, which means it can't use the World Bank's resources as a whole when it's thinking about how large a guarantee it can make. The result is, for any one country, it can guarantee a maximum of $300 million. That buys you one power plant, maybe. MEGA just can't guarantee very much because it's so small. If you reabsorbed MEGA back into the World Bank, somehow persuading the Japanese that they don't need a senior vice president at the institution, because that's why MEGA was separated out of the World Bank in the first place. But anyway, if you could manage to do that, suddenly you could guarantee a lot more just through the MEGA instrument, again, without any government, rich or poor, having to donate an extra cent. I think there are a bunch of things like that that could be discussed at a financing conference. You could think about how to use these financing flows more sustainably. Now, there are many problems we've faced with PPPs in the past, but one of them has been that a power purchase agreement has been purchasing power at a cost much above the price that electricity is then sold at. That is financially unsustainable and has led to serious problems. I could imagine maybe a grand deal, and it would be a multi-billion-dollar grand deal that involved, on the one hand, a promise from sort of led by the G20 countries that there would be more guarantees, there would be more loans, there would be a bigger MEGA, there would be a larger World Bank. And that would help fund the whole load of infrastructure, but in return, that infrastructure would be financially sustainable because services would be priced at cost. Now, there would be issues with concerns about, well, what about very poor people who are accessing these services? I'd say, one, a lot of very poor people aren't accessing these services, and subsidies like this are horribly regressive. But allow for the fact that we want more poor people to get access to these services. There ought to be targeted subsidies for poor people, not general subsidies of energy prices. That would make lending money to infrastructure financially sustainable. Oh, and by the way, it would raise the price of energy and transport and have nice effects on the environment. But that's almost an afterthought. Anyway, so you could make financial flows more sustainable. You can also make financial flows, and especially private sector financial flows, work better. There seems to be, in the G20 and more broadly, real momentum behind tax transparency, for example. I would hope that Addis could push that agenda a little bit further. I would hope that we would see at least a statement in principle that all public-private partnership contracts should be public. These are documents about what the government is going to do with its money. That means they're documents about what government is going to do with our money. We have a right to know about them. A bunch of countries already publish public-private partnership agreements. This is not impossible. It is very straightforward, and I think is part of a way to make sure that private finance is development finance. This is the kind of tools we should use, and Addis should talk about them. But perhaps most importantly, and I'm honestly about to stop, this conference has been about financing and Addis. Addis doesn't just have to be about financing, and indeed I think many of the most important things it is plausible to imagine an Addis agreement talking about are not financial topics. They are and I'm about to say the word migration and plausible next to it. Anyway, there are goals to increase the development impact of migration. That doesn't necessarily mean more migrant flows, just in case UKIP is listening. It means goals to increase the development impact of those migration flows. So perhaps a goal on the percentage of migrants coming from low-income countries, or the percentage of overseas students coming from low-income countries. They could be around technology, and Madalena mentioned technology. What about a statement in principle that the world is going to start moving away from monopolies as the way that we try to encourage technology development. At the moment, you develop a technology, we give you a monopoly. We call it an intellectual property right. It is an intellectual property monopoly. You are the only person who has the right to use this technology, or license this technology from now until, well, if the US Congress had it way, from now until forever, but at least for 20, 30 years, rather than using monopolies, which are fundamentally one, inefficient, and two, regressive, because the monopolies tend to be monopolies in the rich world, owned by somebody in the rich world. Move away from monopolies towards funding of and research of open technology as the way that we increase the stock of technology. We do it all the time. We give prizes, we give research grants, we do all of that kind of stuff. That is the more development-friendly way to promote new technology. And it's something that we should be, pushing at Addis. It's about trade. It's about agricultural subsidies. And the US is just about to go back to subsidizing production. It's terrible. It's about duty-free, quota-free. And finally, it is about the environment too. It's about domestic energy subsidies. If we can broaden what Addis is about in a way that I think the people who are setting up the conference are willing to do, if we can broaden the discussion, not just past aid to non-aid, official finance that is not aid, but also to this other set of issues, I think we can actually come up with something at Addis that won't make us meet the SDGs, but will make a huge difference to the impact of international flows of one kind or another.
Thanks very much, Charles. Lots of resonance for discussions that we've had around the notion that even if ODA can't grow, other forms of flows can grow and can be encouraged to grow, and there are policies to do that. And also lots of good thoughts about the agenda for Addis, which we'll come back to in the discussion. So thank you very much indeed. Andrew.